the participation of Dr. Kerri-Ann Jones, Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. I thank her for making time today. She is our newly sworn-in Assistant Secretary of State for that position. We're delighted that she's here. We're going to go to you first, Kerri-Ann, and then we have a second panel. But let me make just a few observations before we hear from you. And the first point I'd like to make is that the tropical forests of Central Africa's Congo Basin are really beyond description. For those Africans here, you know the enormity of what we're talking about. It's 7 times the size of the state of California is the magnitude of the Congo Basin's forests. And they are a critical economic resource for the 20 million people who inhabit that region, a resource that must be conserved for those people. But it's the entire world that has also a deep interest in the well-being of the Congo Basin forest. And right now, that forest is very much under threat, and that's one of the reasons why we are here today with this hearing. This Congo Basin contains the most diverse grouping of animals and plants in Africa, including many rare and endangered species. Forest elephants, great apes, buffalo, the list goes on and on. Michael Fay could reel off a list for us of just how many plants and animals that are invaluable to us for so many reasons are under threat. These species have genetic and biochemical information, which of course could spark technical advances in medicine or agriculture or industry. And undoubtedly, the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, had this in mind when he joined African government leaders in 2002 at the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And there they launched the Congo Basin Forest Partnership, which frankly I believe is a very innovative initiative that caucus members endorsed through legislation here in Congress. And I just wanted to recognize for a minute Tom Sheehy on my staff, who actually wrote that legislation. And we very much appreciate John Tanner, his initiative in this as well, and John will be with us a little later. There's separate caucuses going on right now that he's going to have to break free of in order to come down here, and we're going to be hearing from John a little later. When I chaired the Africa Subcommittee, we held hearings on the Congo Basin Forest Partnership, and we heard testimony from Michael Fay and others on the rate at which these forests were falling to logging. It was such an alarming clip. Forest landscapes twice the size of Rhode Island were being lost each and every year. The Congo Basin Forest Partnership put into place an international framework to reverse that trend. Signature countries set aside large swaths of land to be protected from harmful activities. Gabon, of course, was a leader in this as well, setting aside 10% of its land in the form of 13 national parks. The challenge, of course, is to see that these do not become paper parks. Let me also say, I was mentioning John Tanner's work in this and the help he gave us in terms of the funding. He is one of the architects of our initiative. He fought very hard in the early stages in order to make certain that it became law. I think, John, one of the things we talked about at the time was forming this caucus so that on an ongoing basis we could monitor the progress of the Congo Basin Forest Partnership and make certain that the signatories to that accord kept their commitments, and that's part of what we're doing today. The unpleasant fact is that the Congo Basin, the forests in that basin, continue to disappear. Oil fields in some of the countries in that basin have aged, and so now the governments have looked elsewhere for revenue, and that's undermined the partnership goals. In Gabon, the Chinese state-run oil company, Sinopec, has been prospecting for new oil reserves in a nature reserve. It has been charged with mass pollution. Areas of the park have been dynamited to create roads, fueling the bushmeat trade, and creating what we call empty forests. By the way, unsustainable commercialization of wildlife has occurred here in the United States. The fact is that by the 1920s there were fewer than 500,000 white-tailed deer. I don't think there were probably any of them east of the Mississippi at that time. So, you know, the U.S. has had experience with the difficulty in the past of maintaining its parks, and frankly, much of the wildlife in the Congo Basin cannot reproduce quickly enough to survive the hunting pressure. Here, the white-tailed deer reproduce quickly enough to keep up with some of our bad practices prior to the 20s. Equally troubling, the New York Times recently reported on a project to dam the Avindo River in the heart of Congo Basin to power an iron ore mine. And this, of course, would destroy the Congo Falls and its surrounding habitat. Part of the challenge is that many of the benefits that were promised to partner nations, and specifically one of the things that we talked about at the time was an increase in tourism. That has failed to materialize. Tourism is down worldwide also, but the director of the Wildlife Conservation Society's program in Gabon said they thought they could be Africa's Costa Rica overnight. We need realistic expectations, but we also need to do more on this front. And we need more resources. According to a manager of the Visitor Center in Loango National Park, park rangers, and there are only 15 there, they see the poachers all the time, but they lack the essential equipment like speedboats. They can't give chase. They don't have the ability to deter or apprehend the poachers. And for sure, African nations need greater political will to conserve and properly manage their natural resources. So the Congo Basin Forest Partnership needs much work, including on this end, including by us in Congress. And I share at least one witness's concern that the aid programs have become too removed from the core mission of protecting parks. We've had sort of a creeping evolution of the aid programs that are not focused right now on the fact that park rangers need equipment. They need to be trained. Better logging practices must be developed. The caucus will be pursuing this issue of creeping and peripheral aid objectives. But regardless, the Congo Basin deserves support because I'm sure the region's forest landscapes would be much smaller without the initiative that we have in place here. I think what Americans take for granted, Yosemite, Yellowstone, our entire magnificent national park system, required great foresight. It required a lot of political commitment to create that. We led the world. And while the Congo Basin Forest Partnership is appropriately an international initiative, American leadership is critical. Making this leadership more effective is the point of today's hearing. Those would be the observations I would make, John, at this point, and I don't know if you wanted to add some comments.
Here we go. Thank you, Ed. That was very comprehensive. I've been advised we have 4 witnesses that have far more to provide than I might, and to forego my opening statement, I agree with Ed, and I thank you for your work in this regard as well. There are a couple of things I wish that I could ask our witnesses to touch on today, if I might, and that is, how does the Congo Basin Reform Initiative fit in with our foreign assistance, with the global scheme of our foreign assistance reform equation, and what role may you see it playing in the regional security and stability equation, because that, I think, has as much to do with what we're able to do, maybe, as anything else. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. John, we'll go to Dr. Kerri-Ann Jones, and Dr. Jones was sworn into her current post just in August. Previously, she served as the director of the experimental program to stimulate competitive research for the state of Maine, as Associate Director for National Security and International Affairs at the White House. of Office of Science and Technology Policy, and she worked in management and technical positions with the U.S. Agency of International Development. Dr. Jones obtained her Ph.D. from the Department of Molecular Biophysics and Biochemistry at Yale. Thanks again for being here, Dr. Jones, and we look forward, Secretary, to your to working with you over the years ahead.
Congressman Royce and Congressman Tanner, it is truly my pleasure to be here today to share the State Department views on the Congo Basin Forest Partnership. As President Obama observed during his trip to Africa in July, the true sign of success is simply not whether we provide assistance, but is this not on?
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. Technical assistance. Thank you very much. It's simply, our president's point was it's simply that it's not providing assistance, but it's whether we are partners in building Africa's capacity for transformational change. Today, as Undersecretary Otero emphasized earlier at the Congo Basin Forest Partnership Roundtable, that wise management of the ecosystem by the people of Africa is important to the region's very survival. Partners around the world, including the United States, strongly support this effort. As you well know, the Congo Basin forest is a critical ecosystem and the backbone of Africa's biodiversity. The forest and its wildlife play a major role in the lives, economies, and the health of Africans. We also know Central Africa is a region of great complexity with serious economic and security challenges. By some estimates, as many as 5 million people have died as a result of conflict in the DRC over the past decade. Countless others have been displaced. Despite these challenges, Central Africa is also a region of great promise and hope. It is rich in minerals, timber, and other natural resources. But perhaps its greatest asset is the Central Africans themselves, with whom the United States is committed to realize their conservation goals. To do so, the United States and other partners launched the Congo Basin Forest Partnership in 2002 to help the people of Central Africa to conserve their forests, improve community management and local governance, develop livelihoods and economies, fight illegal logging, strengthen national institutions, and promote trust and cooperation across borders. Since then, the United States has forged a powerful diplomatic and programmatic presence in the Congo Basin through a strong U.S. government partnership that includes USAID's Central African Regional Program for the Environment, CARPE, in Kinshasa, the Department of State, the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, and NASA. Congress's sustained support for the partnership has been absolutely essential to our efforts on the ground. In working with the Congo Basin countries, the United States recognizes 3 core principles. First, the wise management of the Congo Basin ecosystem is essential for the well-being of the people of the region and the stability of their nations. Second, the Congo Basin forest is essential for the global environment as a major carbon sink, as a watershed for one of the world's largest river basins, and as a reservoir of some of the world's greatest biodiversity. Third, and most important, we cannot work alone. This ecosystem's future can only be secured through the concerted, collaborative efforts of partners in Africa and around the world. Since its launch, the Congo Basin Forest Partnership has made tremendous progress and serves as an example for the management of other major ecosystems of global importance. The partnership now brings more than 40 governments, organizations, and business groups together. U.S. government investments of more than $100 million through this partnership since 2002 have helped to train thousands of conservation managers, support the development of national parks and other protected areas, strengthened forest concession management, and enable community management of local resources. U.S. support has also enabled the publication of the unprecedented biannual State of the Forest report that brings the best of science and research in the region to light. Finally, our investments have helped to put 65 million hectares of tropical forest, an area the size of Texas, under improved management planning across vast landscapes that transcend national barriers and boundaries. In addition, mindful of China's growing engagement across Africa, we have worked through our strategic and economic dialogue with China and with our bilateral discussions on illegal logging to explore environmental cooperation in the Congo Basin. As proud as we may be of our accomplishment, much remains to be done. First, we must recognize that in Central Africa, the challenges of deforestation, food security, agriculture, energy poverty, economic growth are integrally connected. Developing an integrated strategy is key to this. Second, we must leverage and guide others' investments in the region to inspire financing that is results-based and catalytic. To do so, we will capitalize on our long experience in Central Africa through this partnership, our physical presence through our regional USAID CARPE office in Kinshasa, and the innovative landscape approach we have pioneered in the region. The third challenge is implementing the sustainable management plans for the 12 landscapes across the Congo Basin that we have laid out with our African partners, graduating from aspiration to action and empowering the people of Central Africa to manage their ecosystems for themselves and their children. This is where our real work begins and where the true test of our success will be, as partners in building the capacity for transformational change. In closing, let me underscore my belief that the CBFP is one of our best tools to engage the people of Central Africa and help them to conserve and sustainably manage the ecosystem that is so vital to their region's future. We are working with a broad range of stakeholders to achieve our core goals of the partnership, a healthy ecosystem and secure and prosperous people. Thank you very much. I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. Now we're on. As it relates to the sustainable programs that are ongoing, how do we address the regional instability? I don't know exactly how to frame this, but the regional instability feeds into the equation that's a minus, for lack of a better term. Could you address that, please?
Right. Well, I think that's a very important question, and it's difficult for this partnership to solve the very complex regional problems that result in conflict in many ways ongoing in different places in the region. However, I think it's a very important tool for providing space for potential nations involved in conflict to work together. So it's really working at the grassroots level where communities are able to interact with their governments, which is a very positive action, and it gives a way where people can work across borders, which I think helps to diffuse conflict. But I think this is an ongoing challenge for the program. I think it does contribute to some of the solutions, but I don't think it can be the only answer.
The CARP program, the Central African Regional Program for the Environment, is basically NGO run. Is there something we can do to assist the NGOs in this initiative? Because I think this has the potential to do what we want to see done with regard to the stability, regional stability, and so on.
I think my colleagues from the NGOs would certainly comment on that as well, but I think in just the general tenor of the program to be very much a program that broadens participation and sort of brings groups in and gives them voice and works across borders. I think to that extent, I think that's what the NGOs are doing, but I think they could speak more specifically to perhaps, I think you're getting at program elements or things that could be done that would be more directed at the particular issue of conflict.
Have you had conversation with them about what state could do in that regard?
I haven't yet because
I would encourage.
I will do
you
that
all
for
to do
sure. Some of these gentlemen I've known from before and others I've just met, and I'm on a fast learning curve.
Yes, Secretary, I was going to just share with you a piece from the New York Times here. And this goes to the issue of what role China is playing in the region and also how environmentally sensitive or insensitive Chinese companies might be. And I'll just read you from the New York Times here. In forests as old as the last ice age, an iron ore mining venture is threatening to destroy a huge waterfall known as Congo Falls by damming the Avindo River to power a mine and its railway. Sinopec, the Chinese state oil company, turned up in Luangwa National Park, which is a lush coastal preserve where elephants wander the beach. Armed with a government letter, the company began seismic testing in the park, setting off loud blasts in its search for oil deposits. And it provided little food for its workers, who hunted the rare wildlife, according to local park officials. Even though French engineers in the 1960s had concluded that they could generate as much power at a lower cost and with less damage by building at rapids outside the park, the Chinese workers plowed a road through the jungle, leaving a wide red gash that opened this once impenetrable forest to poachers. Now, this really touches on exactly the type of situation we're increasingly confronting. You know, in this case, in exchange for the mine's entire iron ore output, Chinese investors would build a 300-mile railroad, hydropower stations, and Deepwater Harbor to help develop the mine. On the face of it, is not something that I think would help the region, but it certainly would destroy this national park. So could I maybe ask about our interaction with the Chinese government on this and with the Gabonese government?
Certainly. We all really have been watching what China has been involved in Central Africa with great interest and some concern. And I would say that what we are trying to do, I think, is work on this from two real levels, if you will. Certainly in our bilateral relationship with China, we are engaging on these topics. We have a discussion going on with China, starting to really get engaged with them on the whole issue of illegal logging, to have that be an element of our bilateral. And we also have, under the dialogue, which I think you're familiar with them, with the strategic and economic dialogue, we are introducing these issues to discuss our concerns and to talk about what's good for the globe and how we're all partners. I think an element of this is discussing with the Chinese. They're joining this partnership as a member, of eventually becoming a member of the partnership in some way, shape, or form, if they would consider that, because it's about the values that the partnership represents and being a member in it. That's way down the road.
And do we know, is there any way to move that up the road for this reason? Mm-hmm. We have an agreement that the international community and international NGOs all signed on to and that host countries all signed on to. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we have one player on the world stage that says, despite that agreement, that there's not going to be poaching, logging, right, resource exploitation in these. We're just not going to abide by this. Right. Is there a way to use shame? Is there a way to use engagement? Is there a way to use pressure and leverage? What tools, if you could talk to us and the administration right now and say, how do we move this forward before we reach a crisis mm-hmm. here in Gabon, what advice would you give us? I
would definitely say engagement and discussions, and I would say certainly shame in the sense of the value systems that we're all trying to sort of embrace as global partners, and I think China is very much a global partner in some areas, and I think we need to sort of work this as a piece of global partnership, this importance of conservation and protection. So on the one hand, we have all of these activities through our bilateral relationship, through our partnerships with China in many other areas. But also we are encouraging the government of Gabon to sort of to follow through on their own regulations and to provide support in terms of engaging in folks who come into their region and sort of are not respectful of the resources that are there. So I think we really appreciate your comments about this. It is certainly something that we are watching and we are trying to bring to the forefront in terms of a lot of our discussions. And I think the facilitator, if I've said that correctly, of the whole partnership has also been working with the Chinese in terms of joining the partnership. I think we have a multi-pronged approach to this. I think we could sort of try to work on it more effectively, and I will certainly try to do that.
Well, things are in abeyance for the moment, even though the road's been built. So the quicker we could move, and maybe you might have some ideas for the NGO community in terms of how they might bring pressure to bear and how we might address this.
Certainly. We'll talk to the NGOs. As I said, I've just been recently brought on, and so I will definitely have some discussions about this to see how we could have a more coordinated approach, because I think more partners from different sectors and different interests discussing this would certainly probably result in more progress.
Now, another question I was going to ask you, and this goes to a point that Michael Fay has been making that you might be familiar with, but Dr. Fay's concern is that the funding is going to programs, but it's not going, they might be important, but they're not Congo Basin Forest Partnership programs. At the end of the day, in his words, they're not directly and inextricably linked to the conservation of the natural resource base. So how do we funnel more of the funding that we put into these funds to make certain that the speedboats are there, that the training is there, that those 15 park rangers really have what they need on the ground? How might we do that?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to your question. I think, first of all, I would need to talk to Michael Fay a bit and get all the details about which programs, because that's something I need to understand. I say with pride, I'm an old USAID hand, and so I think getting to know program details always helps you to understand exactly what's happening, and so I will certainly look into that. I also think that some of this is that the magnitude of the problem that we're trying to address with this partnership is enormous, important, but also very enormous, and so funding is always an issue. And I think,
Is there ways maybe that also the NGO community could intersect here and assist? I mean, part of the concept, I guess, is that we've got to get the funding in to protect those resources, and then another thing we need to do is some amount of sustainable development work in terms of tourism, because that's what we hear most often from countries in the Congo Basin. What could the U.S. do? What could the international community do to help move that along? Give us a few quick thoughts, if you could, on what we might be able to do to encourage tourism to the Congo Basin.
Right. Well, I think first of all, again, I need to sort of dig more into the details here and understand all the moving parts of the program. I also think that some of the community-based activities and having community ownership is a very important part of the whole program in terms of its success. I think at the State Department, what I would like to do is sort of have a long discussion with the NGOs and talk about what we could do in terms of tourism and getting folks there. I think there's some difficulty getting to the region sometimes. I think there are issues that are beyond sort of just the area itself, but how do you get there? I think talking more broadly about how other models of ecosystems have been turned into tourist areas, I think we should sort of bring that into the discussions of the program. I think we need to find some good models to try to see what's happened for difficult to reach areas in terms of stimulating ecotourism. And so I think that's one of the things that state would be happy to have a discussion with the NGOs about.
Well, Dr. Kerri-Ann Jones, I know you were just sworn in last month.
Yes,
So
that's true.
you're ramping up on a lot of things. But I know Dr. Michael Fay is anxious to have those discussions with you and many others in the
Certainly.
NGO community. And I'm going to, John, did you have any other questions?
No, I just want to thank you, and we look forward to working with you. It's an exciting challenge, an exciting time. The room is full, as you can see, so there's no shortage of interest. So.
Oh, I know. Let me just make one other comment. I want you to know, in drafting my written testimony for my confirmation hearing, this was the program I picked out as a model program, because having just read the background papers on it, to bring together this many countries in this important a region with this many government agencies, I thought, this has to work. So this is very important to me. Thank you.